On March 27, 1977, on a tiny island out in the Atlantic, a whole series of small errors, some bad luck, and a few critical misunderstandings all stacked up to cause the single deadliest accident in the history of aviation. This is the story of the Tenerife disaster.
So just picture it. A massive KLM 747 is thundering down the runway, engines at full blast, ready for takeoff. Then, out of this incredibly dense fog, another 747, a Pan Am jet, just appears right in front of it, frantically trying to get off the runway. In those last few heart-stopping seconds, the KLM pilot yanks the controls back, trying to literally jump his plane over the other one. But it was just too late.
So how on earth did this happen? How did two of the most sophisticated planes in the world, with veteran crews, end up trying to occupy the same exact spot on the same runway? Well, it wasn't just one mistake. It was a perfect storm, really. A tragic chain of events that we're going to break down piece by piece.
All right, first things first. To really get a grip on this, we need to look at the collision itself. Let's start with the devastating result of that chain reaction, the moment of impact. 583 people. That's how many lives were lost that day. Let that number sink in for a second. Every single soul on the KLM flight, and almost everyone on the Pan Am jet. To understand how a number that huge was even possible, we have to rewind the clock to something that happened earlier that day, something that seemed completely unrelated, but actually set the whole thing in motion.
You see, the story doesn't actually begin at Tenerife. It starts where both of these planes were supposed to go, but never arrived.
So check this out. Both of these jumbo jets, the Pan Am and the KLM, were headed for Las Palmas Airport in Gran Canaria. But a separatists group planted a small bomb, and it went off in the terminal. Thankfully, nobody was seriously hurt, but authorities, of course, shut the entire airport down. And that meant all these massive planes in the air had to be diverted to the tiny regional airport on the nearby island of Tenerife.
So, you can imagine what happened next. This sudden flood of giant jets put this little airport, an airport that was never ever meant to handle this kind of traffic, under an incredible amount of strain. The pressure was just building by the minute.
I mean, this slide basically lays out a recipe for disaster. You've got a small airport that's suddenly a parking lot for jumbo jets. It only has one runway and one main taxiway to move planes around. And to make everything worse, this place was known for sudden, thick fog that would just roll in off the ocean. And this is the real kicker. It had no ground radar. The air traffic controllers were basically flying blind.
Now, while all these planes are stuck waiting for Las Palmas to reopen, the KLM captain makes a decision that seems logical at the time. To save time later, he decides to top off his fuel tanks right there. But in doing so, his huge 747 completely blocks the only taxiway. And that single decision meant that the only way for any other plane to get into position for takeoff was to drive down the active runway itself.
Okay, and this is where it all really starts to go wrong. You have all these factors, the congestion, the fog, the human pressure, and it all culminates in a total breakdown of communication.
Because that main taxiway was blocked, air traffic control had to get creative. They told the KLM jet to drive all the way down the runway, turn around 180 degrees, and then just wait. Then, they told the Pan Am jet to follow right behind it on the same runway and peel off at an exit called C3 to get out of the way. So now you have two 747s facing each other on the same strip of concrete, in the fog, relying only on what they could hear over the radio.
And just as this is all happening, the visibility drops like a stone, down to only about 300 meters. The Pan Am crew is squinting through the fog, trying to find this C3 exit, but they can't see it. And the turn looked way too sharp for a giant plane anyway, so they figured they must have misheard, that the controller must have meant the next exit, C4. So they kept rolling down the runway, directly into the path of the KLM jet that was sitting there waiting.
At the other end, the KLM captain is getting really antsy. He's worried about crew duty time limits. As soon as he gets his routing clearance from the tower, he radios a really strange, non-standard phrase. He says, "We are now at takeoff." What does that even mean? Does it mean we're in position for takeoff? Or does it mean we are physically taking off right now? The controller in the tower heard it as the first one. And what happens next is just a moment of unbelievable, tragic timing. The controller replies with a very clear command to KLM. Okay, stand by for takeoff. But at the exact same second, the worried Pan Am crew gets on the radio and says, "We are still taxiing down the runway."
Because both of those messages were transmitted at the exact same time, they basically canceled each other out. It's a phenomenon called a heterodyne. So, in the KLM cockpit, instead of hearing the two most important sentences of their lives, "stand by for takeoff" and "we are still on the runway," the pilots just heard a loud 3-second-long squeal. That's it.
They missed both warnings. But even with that squeal, the flight engineer on the KLM plane had a bad feeling. He spoke up. He challenged the captain. He asked, "Is he not clear that Pan American?" This was the last chance. But the captain, so sure of himself, so focused on getting into the air, just brushed him off with a simple, "Oh yes," and he pushed the throttles all the way forward.
After that, what happened was inevitable. So let's turn to the aftermath and how this absolute nightmare of a day completely changed the world of aviation forever.
With all that extra fuel on board, the KLM jet exploded into a massive fireball. No one survived. The Pan Am jet was literally torn apart, but incredibly, 61 people, including the pilots, somehow managed to get out of the burning wreckage alive.
The final investigation found that while yes, it was a chain of many errors, the main cause was the KLM captain taking off without a direct, explicit clearance. This disaster was a brutal wake-up call that sent shockwaves through the entire industry. It forced everyone to take a hard look at not just their rules, but their entire culture.
And believe it or not, the positive results of this tragedy are all around us every time we fly. Radio communication became completely standardized. Words like takeoff are now sacred. They are only ever used for one thing: giving clearance to take off, nothing else. Ground radar became standard equipment. But maybe the biggest change was cultural. Something called Crew Resource Management, or CRM, was developed. It completely flattened the hierarchy in the cockpit. It empowers every single crew member to speak up and challenge the captain, to make sure a flight engineer's worried question is never, ever ignored again.
The loss of 583 lives is just an unimaginable price to pay. But from that wreckage, a foundation of safety was built that literally protects millions of us every single day. And it leaves you with this really tough question, doesn't it? Is it possible that the biggest leaps forward in making us safe can only be born from the absolute worst tragedies?